Welcome back everyone. The topic of this video is why is the Infancy Gospel of Thomas rejected by Christians? In this video we will see what is the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, why isn't it considered reliable, does it corroborate the life of Jesus, and importantly, how does it differ from the four canonical Gospels? First, what is the Infancy Gospel of Thomas? The world is familiar with Jesus Christ, his life from birth till his death and resurrection from the four canonical Gospels in the Bible. However, history is riddled with other stories about Jesus circulated in the early church, which were not accepted as inspired scripture for being inaccurate and apocryphal like the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. Since there are few details about Jesus' childhood period, people were tempted to fill in details seemingly written for the entertainment of 2nd century Christians. The childhood stories, legends, and fabrications seem to be written by authors who were motivated to alter the history of Jesus to suit their own purposes. The Infancy Gospel claims to have been written by Thomas the Israelite, but the author is not identified further as Thomas the Apostle, though the author says the events that are recorded happened in my region. Second, why isn't the Infancy Gospel of Thomas considered reliable? The first recorded mention of the Infancy Gospel was in 185 AD, which is almost 100 years after the oldest Gospel, probably written between 90 and 100 AD, 150 years after the life of Jesus Christ. The Gospel, dating around 150 to 185 AD, is an ancient apocryphal text attempting to fill in details supposedly missing in the four canonical Gospels. The author describes details that are absent from the childhood narrative of Jesus, particularly his childhood as was described in the Gospel of Luke, the first 12 years of Jesus' life. Much of the Infancy Gospel talks about Jesus' childhood in Egypt disrespectfully and offensively, though it states some facts like Joseph and Mary are Jesus' parents, and the narrative starts with them fleeing to Egypt to escape Herod. There are a number of distorted and disturbing characterizations of preteen Jesus in the Infancy Gospel. Jesus is often described as quick-tempered, spiteful, arrogant, disrespectful, and disobedient magic worker, almost as if the author was shaping him to resemble Greek mythological trickster gods, pagan child gods from antiquity, and in line with some aspects of Gnostic thinking. Even as a very young boy, Jesus is described as a miracle worker, that he also performed miracles on the Sabbath, incurring the wrath of people around, just like he often did in the canonical Gospels. But Jesus appears to be far more similar to pagan mythological gods than he is to the Jesus we know from the canonical Gospels. These alternative narratives are built on the foundational truths of the original Gospels but are late lies, falsely attributed to the Apostle Thomas. Scholars believe that the Infancy Gospel of Thomas was designed as a piece of Christian missionary propaganda intended to demonstrate the divine nature of Jesus in a manner familiar to the pagans proselytized by the early Christians. These non-believers had their own set of Greco-Roman or Egyptian gods, and the Infancy Gospel compared Jesus to these gods in a manner designed to impress Hellenistic, Egyptian, and pagan sensibilities. Early Christians in the mythology-driven 2nd and 3rd century regarded the Infancy Gospel as inauthentic, unreliable, heretical, and mischievous fake gospel. Hence, it was not canonized. The fact that it was considered a Gnostic gospel is particularly telling. It was considered a fiction of some Gnostic groups who had doctrinal differences with the original Christian religion established by Jesus Christ and spread by the apostles and followers. Hippolytus and Eusebius of Caesarea, two main sources of early church history, considered it heretical. Hippolytus identified it as fake and heretical in his refutation of all heresies, and his contemporary Origen referred to it in a similar way in a homily written in the early 3rd century. Eusebius rejected it as a heretical fiction in the 3rd book of his 4th century church history, and Pope Gelasius I in the 5th century included it in his list of heretical books that should not be read. Early church father Irenaeus in 180 to 185 AD declared the Infancy Gospel of Thomas as heretical and included it in his list of unreliable non-canonical documents described in Against Heresies. The works of Irenaeus, Hippolytus, and Origen document the various heresies rampant in early Christianity and also tell us that the Gnostics were totally odd and were very creative and innovative in the secret knowledge which could only be revealed to an initiate. The heretical groups absorbed the Christian teachings and applied their own interpretations. According to scholars, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas may have been written in eastern Syria, the location of the Thomas traditions, although it seems that the attribution to Thomas might be a secondary late development. The original language of the document may have been either Syriac or Greek. The Greek manuscripts date from the 14th through the 16th century, while the earliest manuscript is a 6th century one in Syriac. There are few surviving complete manuscripts of the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, and most date to the 13th century. However, many fragments date back to as early as the 5th century. Third, does the Infancy Gospel of Thomas corroborate the life of Jesus? The text details many fanciful stories about Jesus' childhood, portraying him as a bad-tempered, violent child. It details many miracles that Jesus supposedly performed, like Number 1. Bringing dried fish to life, seen in some later versions of the text. 2. Bringing life to clay sparrows that Jesus had crafted on the Sabbath. 3. Cursing a boy who dies. 4. Cursing a boy who dies and his parents who are blinded. 5. Raising a friend who was killed by falling from a roof, and since the parents of the boy are familiar with the character of Jesus, they accuse him of throwing their son off the roof. 6. Healing a man who cut off part of his foot while chopping wood. 7. Carrying water in a cloak after accidentally breaking the water jar. 8. Sowing 1 grain and receiving 100 measures in harvest. 9. Stretching a piece of wood to help his father Joseph, the carpenter, make a bed for a rich client. 10. Healing James from snake bite. 11. Resurrecting a child who died of illness. 12. Resurrecting a man who died in an accident. Fourth, how does the Infancy Gospel of Thomas differ from the 4 canonical Gospels? Firstly, the 4 canonical Gospels do not give us much information about Jesus' childhood except for the birth of Jesus recorded by Matthew and Luke, Jesus' dedication in the temple and his encounter with Simeon and Anna, and the incident when Jesus at age 12 is separated from Joseph and Mary and them finding in the temple discussing things with the teachers. However, Luke sums up Jesus' childhood and adolescent years in Luke 2:40 and Luke 2:52. In Luke 2:22-24, we see that Jesus was presented in the temple for the purification rites required by the law of Moses, and then Luke 2:40 sums up his childhood before age 12. Luke 2:40, and the child grew and became strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, and the grace of God was upon him. In Luke 2:41-51, we see 12-year-old boy Jesus at the temple in Jerusalem listening to the teachers and asking them questions. And after this incident, Luke sums up Jesus' adolescent years and his years as a young adult in Luke 2:52. Luke 2:52, and Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. The portrait of Jesus in the apocryphal text is that of an insolent bully who uses his power frivolously, and people, though impressed with his sheer power and cleverness, were afraid of him. This was supposedly the child Jesus, who was growing strong in spirit, filled with wisdom, having the grace of God upon him, stated by the Gospel of Luke. The Infancy Gospel does not present Jesus as one who honors his parents or who grows in favor with his neighbors and everyone, and therefore is at odds with what we know of Jesus from the 4 original Gospels. Second, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas is in conflict with the inspired canonical Gospel of John about when Jesus performed his first miracle. The claims of Jesus' juvenile miracles totally contradict the canonical Gospels, which present Jesus' miracle at Cana as the first of his signs. At the wedding at Cana, when Jesus' mother tells him that they ran out of wine, Jesus says that his time has not yet come, and in John 2:5-10, we see Jesus turning water into wine. John 2:4, Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." John 2:11, this beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. The Gospel of John clearly states that Jesus turning water into wine was his first miracle. Third, Jesus is also described through several incidents as wiser than his years and wiser than the rabbis and teaching his teachers. The final incident is parallel to the final incident in Luke 2 of Jesus discussing matters in the temple with the teachers. The Infancy Gospel of Thomas also describes a scene in which Jesus identifies himself as Lord, claims that he existed before all worlds, and predicts his death on the cross. The book also indicates that the child Jesus was worshipped as God by those who saw his power. In the canonical Gospels, we see that John the Baptist describes Jesus as Lord and prepares the way for him. As a forerunner of Jesus, his mission was to prepare and announce the coming of the Messiah to people when Jesus was 30 years old. We also see that no one believed Jesus' claims about himself except his followers until his start of ministry and him performing miracles. In fact, Jesus is accused by his own family and the teachers of law of blasphemy. We see that Jesus' authority was questioned in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. There were also unbelief and disputes over Jesus' testimony and over who Jesus is. All this does not corroborate what is presented in the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, child Jesus' claims of divinity and him being worshipped as God. Fourth, the Infancy Gospel, filled with mythical accounts of fabulous miracles supposedly performed by child Jesus, fails to justify the difficulty the older Jesus has in being accepted as gifted in his hometown, stated by the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. It describes Jesus as a brilliant child performing a number of miracles in Nazareth, completely contradicting the portrayal of the natives of Nazareth as described in Matthew 13, Mark 6, and Luke 4. In the canonical Gospels, we see Jesus coming to his hometown Nazareth and teaching in the synagogue on the Sabbath. When the people heard him, they were astonished at his wisdom and wondered how he became so powerful in both word and works. Jesus left Nazareth as a carpenter and came back as a rabbi, complete with a group of disciples, and was rejected there. Matthew 13:54-57. When he had come to his own country, he taught them in their synagogue, so that they were astonished and said, "Where did this man get this wisdom and these mighty works? Is this not the carpenter's son? Is not his mother called Mary? And his brothers James, Jose, Simon, and Judas? And his sisters, are they not all with us? Where then did this man get all these things?" So they were offended at him. But Jesus said to them, "A prophet is not without honor, except in his own country and in his own house." Luke also describes the natives' shocking response to Jesus' initial messianic teachings as the new Jesus as a carpenter's son, totally contradicting the Jesus they supposedly knew in the Infancy Gospel. Luke 4:22. So all bore witness to him and marveled at the gracious words which proceeded out of his mouth. And they said, "Is this not Joseph's son?" The Infancy Gospel presupposes the Gospel of Luke and therefore must have been written after Luke's Gospel was distributed and well known, and is dependent upon Luke's Gospel about Jesus' life, the Sabbath, and Passover. Fifth, the Infancy Gospel attempts to paint Jesus as an unpredictable and bad-tempered child endowed with impressive powers, such as him giving life to clay birds, referenced in another religious book. The canonical Gospels give us a totally contrasting and genuine childhood narratives of Jesus, stating that he advanced in wisdom and favor. Luke 2:51-52. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth, and was subject to them. But his mother kept all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and men. Jesus never performed frivolous miracles like the ones depicted in the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, but always did miracles that were beneficial to others and signs that pointed to a greater truth. The character, words, and actions of Jesus as presented in the Infancy Gospel are totally incompatible with the Scriptures, which describe the messianic personality of Jesus since childhood, his teachings of loving even our enemies, not only our neighbors, and forgiveness, and his ministry. Thus, we see that the tone and spirit of the Infancy Gospel is in total contrast to everything we find in the four canonical Gospels. Lastly, some parts of the Infancy Gospel of Thomas claim that Thomas the Israelite is the author, but it appears to be a late addition and is uncertain if it is referring to the Apostle Thomas. According to manuscript analysts, the work was unknown until sometime in the second half of the 2nd century and drew on Luke's Gospel for the story of Jesus in the temple, and despite the pretext of its opening verse, it simply cannot have been written by the Apostle Thomas, given its late authorship and unfamiliarity with Judaism, Jewish life, and customs of the 1st century. Scholars believe that the attribution to Thomas, a disciple remembered by Christians as doubting Thomas, is false and is likely added after the infancy gospel account was already in circulation and referred to the text as the Paidica or childhood deeds of Jesus. The conclusion is that it was a Gentile fabrication and was not cited favorably by anyone in early or later mainstream Christianity whose works are extant. It became popular in later medieval times when superstitions reigned supreme. Thus, we see that the fanciful gospel was written much later than the original four canonical gospels and not considered part of scripture according to the Council of Carthage in 397 AD. It never was accepted and was rejected by the Church as heresy. It is considered Gnostic by some and preaches another Jesus that the Apostle Paul warned us against in his epistle to the Corinthians. Put simply, it was not written by Thomas and had no apostolic authority or pedigree. In conclusion, the Infancy Gospel of Thomas has no factual connection to the four canonical Gospels of the Bible, as it was written far too late to be considered authoritative and contain blatantly false content, including both factual mistakes about the region of Jerusalem and doctrinal ideas that totally contradict the inspired Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Early Christians recognized the Infancy Gospel for what it is, late fictional account that present a false and mythical version of Jesus Christ. As a historical resource, it is useful as it contains details about certain heresies and the origin of superstitions about Jesus. It is not in any sense comparable to the inspired words of God as penned in the actual Bible. Most of the spiritual content of the Infancy Gospel aligns with Gnosticism, an early heresy that plagued the Christian Church. Those who recognized such works as fraudulent kept them from being considered as part of the Canon of Scripture. Some scholars think that the Infancy Gospel of Thomas was meant to demonstrate Jesus' deity through a demonstration of power, but in reality, he appears to be more like a pagan god, capricious and prone to temper tantrums. Therefore, it is with good reason that modern scholars reject the authenticity of the Infancy Gospel of Thomas, as did the early Christians. The four canonical Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John have been accepted by the Church from the beginning as true, as being the earliest accurate narratives of the life and teachings of Jesus Christ, written by the apostles who actually knew him and at least associated with people who knew him when he was on earth. Thus, they were written within the lifetimes of the eyewitnesses who knew Jesus Christ personally. 2 Timothy 3:16-17. All scripture is given by inspiration of God and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, thoroughly equipped for every good work. Thanks for watching. God bless you all.